Hello, Abigail here with the astrology of Cancer season. This is just a video to run down the major transits, planetary shifts, events during Cancer season so you can kind of know what's happening and get an idea of when the dates are. Um, just a reminder, this affects charts differently, so look up where these things are in your chart as these planets and bodies move through the sky. Understanding that, for some people, some of these events are going to be really exciting, and for some other people, they can be difficult, they can be good. It just depends on where you are, who you are. I also say this all the time with like people I'm working with when I do general kind of reads like this. Everyone's at a certain point, beginning, middle, or end of a journey or a story. You can be in multiple different stories and journeys at the same time. So use your intuition to kind of place yourself where you belong in this. So, is, for instance, a good example is like the Mars Uranus conjunction. If you are in a situation that you are fighting to stay in, which I would consider either usually the middle of a situation, that might end up ending that situation. However, if you are at the end of a situation, this could be you gaining something on the other side of something difficult. And if you're at the beginning, this could be the start of something new. So keep that in mind as I'm discussing this or with any other video I make, because I find that it really affects interpretation to understand where you are at. And also, your knowledge and what you know about yourself is equally important to the astrology we are talking about. So don't minimize that. Anyways, moving into Cancer season, it starts on the 21st, and we head in really quietly for the first few days. Obviously, there are events and aspects happening. I'm not giving you all of the information about everything that is happening in this season. But the first major kind of transition we have is Mars going into Gemini. Important to note, this is also going to be leading to the Mars Uranus conjunction that I used as an example, and this is one of the most volatile events of this season. So know that that is kind of what is uh, majorly affecting this. Also, to remember that with Mars' ingress, we will also get a bunch of aspects to Uranus, Neptune, and eventually Saturn, as well as Pluto. So, just this entrance is going to shake up a lot of things. So, keep that in mind as kind of the overview of this. Also, important to note, we are now in a Mercury retrograde. And so, that's going to be something that really, I don't want to say taints, but like tinges the season. There's going to be a sense of kind of returning back. Also, when the sun was in Pisces, we had the Pisces Mercury retrograde. So it's important to note that, this will be another return, kind of different topic, but I think some stuff might be coming up from, end of the winter. So keep that in mind as we move through this. Also recognize that when Mercury has retrogrades, it does them within an element. And so we are currently in the water element. By the time we get into next year, it will be shifting into air. But so we'll have some partial retrogrades where it'll be like partially in air, partially in water and stuff like that. So just a little sneak peek into how these things happen. Then the day after, on June 29th, so the Mars entrance into Gemini is June 28th. June 29th, we have the full moon in Capricorn at 8 degrees of Capricorn. This will be its own thing. On the bright side, it is kind of detached. It will still have that square with Neptune, but it is detached from Pluto, and it is detached from not necessarily Saturn, but from Uranus. So there is an element of being able to get some work done because we're not connected to those planets that are making us do certain things, and then like causing some chaos and causing some depth. So I'm looking forward to that as being a really good time in what is going to be a tricky time to build, grow, plan, things like that. On the same day, though, Mercury does station retrograde. So we're going to be forced to slow down in order to plan our future, in order to kind of get real with our resources and personal gifts and assets and how we want to use them for the rest of 2026, moving into the next 6 months, which would be, Capricorn season, which will have a Capricorn new moon. So then we move on to the 30th. And so, yeah, this little section of like 3 days is one thing after another. We get Jupiter's ingress into Leo. This will be the first and only entrance into Leo. It's reminder for this. This is actually in connection to all of those other things. So we will have a Uranus sextile. We will have the Pluto opposition. We will have a trine with Saturn and Neptune during this transit. So this is a very intense moment. The South Node will be joining it around the same time. We will also have Mars and Leo. This happens later in the year, transitioning over into next year. And so Jupiter is going to be expanding, but Jupiter and Leo also can be an element of overconfidence, of kind of believing a little too much in the essence or vibe of someone. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be confident. I think this is actually going to help some people get over some, some sense of like self-worth and be like, oh no, I can do it. uh, Imposter syndrome will be much easier to combat with this energy. But for people who are already confident, this is an element of like going to an extreme. Also, Jupiter and Leo is giving things like cult leader and people following cults of personality, um, especially newer ones. So while this is going to be, I think, really, it's going to feed us a lot and give us a lot of kind of hope and joy. There are also pitfalls in this, and we're going to kind of see it start right away because the minute Jupiter enters, it goes into that opposition with Pluto, sextile with Uranus, the trine with Neptune. And so there's a lot of possibility to kind of overshoot your shot if you do not pay attention to history, whether it is your own history, past life history, or the history of the world. There are a lot of mistakes can be made under this moment. So keep that in mind. Then on July 4th, yes, my USA folks, be cautious. I will say there's not a whole lot of planetary events where I'm like, don't do anything. But a Mars Uranus conjunction in Gemini, be careful on this holiday. If you are celebrating the 4th of July, be very careful. If you're doing fireworks, be very careful. If you're messing with anything that has gas, even a grill, be careful. This is not the time to be foolish. Also, remembering that Neptune is in a sextile here, and so there is a lack of visibility happening. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of stuff that I say, hey, don't do it. Some of them, Jupiter Uranus conjunctions, Mars Uranus conjunction, Mars Saturn conjunctions, Uranus Saturn conjunctions. These are aspects that I go, hey, maybe we don't do too much this day. Don't overplan. Don't do anything wild. If you ever want to like skydive or something, this is not the day to do that. Okay. So it's one of those days where like I don't want you to live in fear, but I also want you to know that this type of energy is like car accident, explosion. I'm like specifically hearing like chemical explosion or event. It does make me wonder if we are going to see around this time, like obviously we're already seeing the infrastructure problems in the US. It was already a problem before we stripped away a lot of our resources and gave them over to other people's private bank accounts. Fun. And while we didn't technically do that, it is our right to rise up and resist, and that's not happened fully, and that's by design. Um, but I do think we're going to see with Uranus. Uranus is also innovation, and there are two sides to every coin. So there's the innovation, there's also the backsliding. There's also the what happens when we don't innovate, what happens when we don't change. And Mars coming in is going to be showing us the ways in which countries in the world, especially with a large outer planet, have not progressed enough to deal with what they're trying to deal with. We're going to see stuff around data centers. We're going to see stuff around chemical plants. We're going to see things about oil spills and refinery stuff. That's also just going to happen anyways because of Neptune's sextile with Uranus, like highlighting how harmful things are, and yet people are still going to do them. So this July 4th moment, please, 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 just be careful. Don't do anything foolish. This is not the moment to be like, oh, the kids will be fine for 5 seconds without me. No, this is a good day to be a helicopter parent. There's just a lot that can go wrong, and it can go wrong very quickly, especially in Gemini. If there are fire warnings, do not play with fire on this day. Just double check everything. Don't do anything foolish. And like I said, I don't normally give this type of warning, but I do for this type of aspect. Because if it doesn't happen to you, it will happen to someone around you, for sure. Then on the 9th, we get Venus going into Virgo. And good to know that Venus is ahead of the sun by quite pace, and that's because Venus later this year is going into a retrograde. Venus and Mercury, the reason they have this retrograde motion is that their transit can't be super far from the sun. And so obviously, if you know anything about retrogrades, they're not technically like literally a planet moving backward. It's a planet circling back through the orbital path, basically. And so with this energy, Venus will be circling back to a closer degree to the sun, and the sun will have time to catch up to Venus. And guess what? We're also going to have a Mercury retrograde around that time. It's in October. But that's why Venus is so far out from the energy of the sun. You know, a sextile is a pretty wide berth for Venus. She's more often side by side with the sun, and either in the sign that the sun is in, or in the sign next to the sun. But Venus in Virgo, you know, it will be interesting because we won't have any planets in Venus ruled signs, so not as influential as some Venus Virgo moments. But Venus in Virgo is in detriment and in fall. So it is kind of like the most unhappy version of Venus. I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing, but I do find that people with a native Venus in Virgo do struggle in relationships. They struggle to find people that they find compatibility with. They often struggle to regulate their desire to like overgive, but overgive in a sense that sometimes can become unintentionally controlling or manipulative. It can become enabling. And if it isn't enabling, then there's the kind of other side of that coin, which is like hyper controlling or like hyper critical, either of yourself or of the people you are in partnership with. And so Venus in Virgo, I find is helpful for cleaning house relationally and for like really setting boundaries and stuff. But Venus doesn't really like doing all those things. Venus wants to be fun. Venus wants to be flirty. Venus wants to be playful. And having to go into Virgo and be nitpicky and like really like dive down into um, like what is going on in the minutia of things, she's not a fan. Um, so just know that we're getting that energy where romance is going to be a bit more calculated. However, if you have had a habit of like kind of, I'm just gonna check some notes, of kind of throwing yourself in head first into relationships without a care in the world and kind of committing to stuff that maybe you wouldn't if you weren't like hopped up on hormones and on desire and on craving someone, you know, this is good. It will help you stabilize. It will help you balance. Yeah, I'm looking to make sure I didn't misplace where the nodes. Yeah, the nodes don't shift until late July. I wanted to make sure. But with this Venus Virgo stuff, just know that it's a bit more nitpicky. Love is a little less kind of spring is in the air, la la la. It's very much like, no, we're kind of getting down to the nitty gritty. We're not messing around. I also think a lot of people are going to kind of regain some standards. And I would also encourage you to really dig into this because this Venus and Virgo transit, I think, will be helpful, a helpful precursor to the retrograde in Scorpio and Libra later in the fall, because that's going to be telling us to shape up. That's going to be telling us to really lock in on our desires, lock in on our wants and needs when it comes to relationships. And if you've been kind of giving too much away or like being like, oh, well, I'm not really into it. We don't really have the same values, but maybe it'll work. That's not really the energy of 2026. If you are not specific, you will get a lesson, not a kind of benefic moment. Because Saturn in Aries is also teaching us that maybe we shouldn't go overboard all the time. You know, Saturn is kind of countering Aries energy in a sense, and it's kind of like, yeah, you can be in love and all that, but like, reel it in. Reel it in a little bit. Don't like give away parts of yourself that you shouldn't. Don't jump into things feet first if you haven't like taken some time to self-reflect. Don't just get into a relationship because you feel lonely. Get into a relationship because you really want to be with this person. It doesn't have to be like long term, but there needs to be a genuine desire and like interest in something rather than just doing it because you can. Although I do think there will be a shift in some people in this Venus Virgo moment and in the retrograde of like a more a longer term outlook, not necessarily for marriage or a family or anything, or just because it will be easier with the times that we are in to have more stable people around, to be honest. A recession indicator is people committing for longer because of finances and because of instability and because of housing costs and things like that. And this is going to be a time to really get down to that nitty gritty. I also think some people are going to be recognizing that this is going to sound harsh. I know it is, but love is not enough. Like, love is wonderful and beautiful, but in a relationship that is romantic, it is not enough. You have to have shared values. You have to have reciprocation. You have to have care. And just loving someone doesn't always lead to those things. They require practical, practical output. And I know some people will be like, that's not love, Abigail. And it's like, no, I've experienced love like this, where someone genuinely cares about you, but they cannot or will not follow through on the things that are physically required or structurally needed to maintain the love over time. And so that's something that's going to be a big theme, especially as we move into the later part of the year. And the minute we hit Libra, even though it's at the later degrees, we will be on our path into this retrograde, which is Libra is right after Virgo. So this is kind of a nice tee up, and I would use it to be a bit dry about romance, to be a bit more calculating, to really focus on what is going to be best for you rather than just kind of falling into feelings. And that's part of the reason why Venus does not like this is because Venus wants to be lush. Venus wants to lean in. And I'm not saying that you have to give up love and romance, but there is a very distinctive part that is like, whoa, whoa, let's make sure that what we're investing in is going to give us a return and that we're going to get something out of this versus just kind of throwing our energy to the wind. This is also something that's been coming up with Neptune and Aries that I've found when it comes to archetypes that tend to be forced to overgive in society. There is a dryness and a stinginess. This is also Saturn and Aries. And stingy in a good way of like having boundaries and holding, your energy close instead of just kind of giving it away. And so I think we're also going to see more movements of people who are attracted to men walking away from those relationships because of how poisonous and vile the patriarchy is. And this Venus Virgo is an opportunity because the symbol for Venus is a virgin. But if you take the non-patriarchal version of that, that is simply someone who is unto themselves, who has kept their kind of parts together for themselves and have not given them away to society or to a man. And so that is going to be a theme in this Virgo moment of like, no, I don't have to give myself away. And if I'm having to give big chunks of myself away, is this relationship, doesn't have to be romance, this relationship, this friendship, this family dynamic, is it worth it if I'm constantly losing parts of myself and having to overserve? Now, the other flip of this is that there can be a tendency to overserve and to over enable. So make sure that you're on the side of like, and no, I will be setting firm boundaries and I will be holding myself accountable to those boundaries and recognizing that people who truly love me, even if they struggle initially with some of these boundaries, they are here to make sure that I'm also safe and vice versa. So it will be a rough transit, as it always is when it comes to like being able to like fully surrender to love, but it is a necessary one for the moment in time, for the energies, for the relationships you may be currently in. Like if you're not a single person, this is talking about rebalancing. I always find Virgo and Libra incredibly close energetically. Kind of same goal, different approach. Both want, Virgo purifies to get things kind of down to their smallest form, and Libra wants balance, and both of those things stabilize things. And so the next little bit, honestly, into the fall, we are going to be having this discussion around, excuse me, mouth went dry suddenly, around labor and emotional labor and who is doing it the most. And specifically, I do think it's going to come on gendered lines. In a lot of ways of where like, why are femmes, why are queer folks expected to be silent, to uphold this system, to sacrifice parts of themselves, while men, whether they are good guys or not, specifically cis men, are destroying things and crushing things and ruining things. And even the good ones aren't like holding their own communities accountable and are expecting queer folks and women to do that, which also endangers us. And so that's just a big theme I see as we move through this Venus journey, and it's a much longer journey than just this season. And I think that's important to note. Then moving on July 12th, we have the Mercury Cazimi. This will be the Mercury Cazimi retrograde. We will later have one where it is direct, where it is coming back into a connection. But this is a moment I find in Mercury retrogrades of like a turning point. If you've been struggling with the energy, if you haven't known where things are going, if things have been a bit topsy-turvy, this is a moment when you might get some insight into how that might be different, into a world that might have change involved. And also, I tend to find on the other side, it tends to feel like things start to move a little bit better, even if we're still in the retrograde, which we are. And so, this is an opportunity and a time where I just tell people to enjoy that day. And it can be as big as a massive revelation or as small as just a little interaction outside. With Cancer, it might be a connection with someone else. It might be a connection with a woman or someone who gives off um, the energy of like abundant protection. And so I would encourage you to enjoy that for what it is. Sometimes it is a massive event and sometimes it is small. It really depends on your chart and where you're at. But enjoy this day. This is one of those moments where, like, if the rest of the season has been hard, this is a time when, in the very least, you will get information to make plans and take steps moving forward, especially being in Cancer when it comes to like emotional issues and topics. Then we have our final event, which is the new moon in Cancer, which will be, I think it's like 21 degrees, 22 degrees of Cancer. Interestingly enough, it is very close to the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, so I definitely see that there's a story playing out here in those degrees. If you have planets there, asteroids, or anything aspecting it, those are very important. And, you know, it is a new moon. It is the domicile new moon. And so regardless of, I don't think there's actually that many, there's not that many aspects for this one because there's not a lot of stuff at late degrees at this point. And there's things over in like the next door sign. So there's not going to be a whole lot of planetary stuff going on outside of this. It does feel like a standalone moment to really manifest and hone into something that you've really been wanting. The Jupiter Cancer transit, which is now over by the time we get to this date, has been a lot about yearning, has been a lot about desire, and how yearning and desire and nostalgia can direct our path moving forward, and how we also have to get clear about what parts are actually real and attainable and what parts are just us being a bit escapist. And so this new moon in Cancer, with Jupiter now no longer in the sign, it's an opportunity to have a fresh look at those desires and those yearnings and to put them back out into the world in whatever form you want them to. For some of you, they may stay exactly the same, but to kind of reconsider what you want and what you desire and then release it into the world. And while 2026 is chaotic, I do think this kind of volatile energy is actually very ripe and very fertile for the unexpected to happen. So if you have big manifestations that under a practical lens would not happen, this is the energy to use. Are the outcomes going to be anything you expect? No. But you are going to get something back that will give you the things that you desired. I just always say maybe hold it loosely. Hold what happens loosely, but hold tightly the way you would like to feel when you get it. So say you're like, I want to earn X number of money, and instead the universe gives you like an inheritance. That's not a bad thing, right? But it did come in a way that you didn't expect. Or the other way around, where you're like, I would love to get an inheritance or just a windfall. And then the universe like gives you a raise or something where over time you get more versus just all at once. And so I encourage you with this new moon to have that perspective and that mindset. And I'll talk about it more when we get there, and I'll do a video and all this stuff. But just something to look forward to and something to be thinking about during the Mercury retrograde. Oh, I knew there was a planet conjunct. The Mercury retrograde is going to be conjunct this new moon. I was like, I know there's a planet in there. It's just not an aspect, it's a conjunction because it's 0 degrees, so it's not an angle. The fun things you learn that astrologers worry about is like whether a conjunction is aspect or not, and technically it's not, by the way. So just know that that will be there. We will be processing, we'll be working through stuff, but it is an excellent time to put forth a revised version of your hopes and dreams and plans. Especially if you have a spell or something you've been working on, this might be the time to either refresh it or to remake it with components that are more aligned, and then do like a little transmutation spell. Anyways, this is the overview of the astrology for Cancer season. It is a lot of highs and lows, guys, heads up. But there is a lot of opportunity for big stuff to happen, and not necessarily big bad stuff, some big good stuff as well. So, keep hoping and keep manifesting. And this is also not a bad season to get a chart reading. I will put my little hat in the ring for for readings, to get a chart reading or get someone to take a peek at your chart, just because the eclipses will be coming up shortly after this. They will start in Leo season, in the August portion of Leo season. So this time is not a bad time to take a look, especially since so much is changing all at once. Especially if you have plans for the future, this is a good time to be like, all right, with all of the change that's happening, what are my steps moving forward? And I do offer those kinds of readings. Anyways, if you enjoy my work, if you like it here, please like and subscribe. You can always pop comments or questions down below. I will answer them. If you have any questions for me that you would like a longer response to, or any inquiries about readings, you can go find me in DMs or go on my website and ask me there. Anyways, my loves, I wish you a blessed Cancer season, and I will see you all in my many other videos. Bye.